Dennis and Kacper from Submission Radio here post-UFC fight night with the man, the myth, the legend himself. You've heard him on the program many a time before, but now he's here in person. Elias Cepeda, welcome, to a post-fight breakdown of all the craziness that's been going on. So let's kick this off because there's a few things to talk about. Derrick Lewis beats Roy Nelson. It was a fight that a lot of people believed Nelson was going to win. Lewis ends up winning a decision. A lot of people felt like it was a very close one. I want to go around and ask you guys what your thoughts were on the decision for Lewis. I'll go with you first, Elias. What were you thinking? Did the right man get his hand raised?
It's a really interesting fight to score. I felt that, like as most people did, that Nelson controlled most of the fight. There was a rough patch in the beginning of the first, and certainly a real close call at the end of the third, where he looked staggered, maybe almost finished. So, but everything in between that, he scored with 7 or 8 takedowns, controlled against the fence, controlled against the ground. In fact, Lewis couldn't get off the fence without John McCarthy's assistance most of the time. So I had it for Nelson. However, I like any judge that is thinking about damage first or who came closer to finishing a fight. So I could see an argument for someone giving Lewis the first and the third. I definitely think he won the third. The first round scoring for him surprised me because I thought that whatever damage he did in the beginning of the round, that Nelson was able to kind of refute by getting the takedowns and controlling on the ground. So I can't fault Lewis's effort. I'm glad he got rewarded for his effort, but I do feel bad for Roy Nelson.
What about you, Kacper? Did you agree with the decision?
No, I didn't. I thought Roy Nelson won. I mean, as far as what Elias said, I do agree. I think the first round definitely went to Nelson. The second, to Derrick Lewis. Clearly, it wasn't a 10-8 round, although it was extremely dominant. The second round was clearly Roy Nelson. And then the third one, I don't think Derrick Lewis really landed that many strikes. And I think as far as what constitutes as damage, as a fan or as a judge, you're never going to feel the punches or the strikes that are landing. What you can really go by is how a person reacts. And there was that massive, massive shot that Derrick Lewis hit Roy Nelson with that really would have rendered any other man unconscious, and yet Roy Nelson just ate it. So even though it was a great shot, to me, it wasn't a fight-finishing shot. And so in that sense, I think because he controlled most of the fight, I would give it to Roy Nelson.
His chin is, I've always said, one of the biggest problems because he can take any shot and it lets him fight the way that he did tonight. But a rematch, Derrick Lewis wants a rematch. I mean, I know it's an exciting fight, but is this necessary?
No, but it isn't. But I love that Derrick Lewis had the class to say, I want to do this again, even though he got away with the win. So, you know, if both those guys want to do it, then certainly I'll watch.
Lewis was falling asleep during the press conference as well, so I wanted to wake him up and remind him, hey, you're in front of the world.
Almost all of us were. It's been a long day.
Yeah, no sleep for us, but we're doing some fun stuff here. Let's talk about the main event, though. RDA, a heavy favorite against Eddie Alvarez. A lot of people believing that he was going to do it, including myself. I mean, I guess the theory was if you go forward against Eddie Alvarez, it's going to be a tough night for you because, I mean, the way to beat him is when you move backwards, you have some distance. And I guess he proved it tonight. Your reaction to this win?
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. I thought the fight could have ended quickly like it did, or that it had the potential to go a very long time. Both men went for takedowns, I believe, early. So we kind of got a taste of that both men were willing to mix it up, go with different strategies. I like that RDA was looking for a takedown as well. But it's just one of those things when a guy like Eddie Alvarez hits you clean coming in, man, you may not have much life left in you. RDA, to his credit, must be so well conditioned that he just kept on going on autopilot. But a remarkable win for Alvarez. You know, if RDA can recover well enough, I could see these two guys doing it a few more times.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because obviously in the press conference he said, hey, I want a rematch. And we've seen a lot of rematches happening in the UFC. I don't like the rematches. I'll be honest. I like fresh new matchups. What about you, Kacper? Do you want to see an immediate rematch for this thing? Or who would you rather see RDA face next?
I'm with you in the sense that I generally don't like immediate rematches. I don't mind seeing them down the line. In this case, I'm not opposed to an immediate rematch, as crazy as it may sound. Wow. And the reason being, look, I'm not saying that that's the fight that should happen. I'm not saying it's the fight that makes sense, but I wouldn't hate it because I think this fight, even if they fought 10 times, this could go either way. They could split it, you know, 50-50 or 5-on-5. The way the fight sort of started out, Alvarez was doing a lot of circling. He was using his lateral movement, something that RDA is very good at cutting off, and he wasn't doing that. Then he did start to cut it off. Then he did start to get Alvarez with the leg kicks, and then he did start applying that pressure, and he backed, Alvarez up against that cage. So it was sort of, in some ways, a back and forth fight. RDA got caught. I mean, it's not like it was really that dominant either way. I think this, if they do a rematch, this has the potential to either go, 3 rounds, 5 rounds. RDA could get the finish, so I don't mind seeing a rematch.
Conor McGregor beats Nate Diaz at UFC 202. Do you set up this Alvarez matchup, or is this too soon and ties up 2 titles, maybe a bit dangerous?
Yeah, I think other than what it would do to the featherweight division and continue to tie it up, other than that, yeah, I'd love to see the fight. But on the condition that McGregor then give up his featherweight title, not in some punitive way. He shouldn't be punished for having the guts to move up a weight class, but just out of practicality. At that point, we know we're going to have about a year without someone defending that belt. So I'd love to see it happen. I think it'd be really exciting. I think both guys could talk it up, and both guys have a lot of good highlights to use to promote the fight as well.
Yeah, to me it sort of feels like this is the fight that Eddie Alvarez has been waiting for. He's been through so much, had to sell off his houses, had to battle Bellator, struggled with a couple of losses, and now it almost feels like he deserves a big matchup like that. So interested to see what happens there. But let's talk about a fight that's not going to be for a title anymore at UFC 200. I mean, we just found out about this, guys, not too long ago. And if you look at our faces, you could see they're weathered from the fact that there's been a lot of surprises today. Anderson Silva will now take on Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. It won't be for a title. It's going to be a 3-round fight. I mean, let's do reactions first. Elias, what did you think when you saw Anderson walk out into the press conference before the UFC Fight Night press conference even happened?
Yeah, I thought the thing I thought of was, as dominant as Anderson was for so many years, as much of a champion as he was, in terms of just having the belt. What's cool to me to see about him right now is that more than all of that, he's just a fighter at heart. He's just a scrapper. He's fine with being an underdog. He's not just the dominant Anderson Silva we celebrated for a long time, but he's just a dude that likes to fight. And although that makes me worried for his health at his age, and especially after a fight like he had with Michael Bisping, where both of them took a lot of damage, I mean, I really love that Anderson Silva is willing to yet again step in on short notice against a bigger dude. He did it with Stephan Bonnar. He's fought bigger men before. I love underdog Anderson Silva as much as more than I love dominant champion Anderson Silva personally.
A couple of losses, some controversy. Do you think this is possibly one of the most important fights in his career now, to sort of show people where he's at and sort of maybe even win back some of that legacy that a lot of casual fans believe he's lost?
I mean, he stands to win an incredible amount, right? He's going up against, in a lot of ways, the legitimate light heavyweight champion. If he can beat Daniel Cormier, even though it's not for a title, people will understand that he essentially is the real champion. And that's a predicament in on itself, because what do you do then? Like you asked at the post-fight press conference, do you have, an immediate rematch? But all that aside, I don't really think this fight will affect Anderson's legacy too much. I think that a lot of fans will gain more respect for him, but I think his legacy is sort of solidified at this point. And this fight is just crazy, because we spoke about this yesterday in our reaction to Jon Jones, being taken off the card, and you and me sort of said, look, Anthony Rumble Johnson, that doesn't make sense. Have a full training camp for the title. Glover Teixeira, take your time. Don't take this fight on a few days' notice. And then we looked at middleweights and thought the idea, the notion is purely ridiculous. And we never once considered Anderson Silva stepping in and taking this fight. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is an everything fight, and yet it's a nothing fight at the same time. Anderson Silva is, in some ways, the perfect fight, because it's not going to hold up a division. You don't have a guy like Michael Bisping, who's a champion, but may lose, and it may look him bad. It's not going to be, Rumble Johnson or Glover Teixeira, who derails potential contenders. Anderson Silva's kind of in limbo, and I think we all agree that he just needs big fights, and here he is getting a massive fight on arguably the biggest stage of all time. So I really like the matchup.
Well, to me, it's an opportunity for a rise of the old school. Brock Lesnar beats Mark Hunt. What does that mean for his future? Anderson Silva beats DC. Does that mean a title rematch? But do you think this fight should have been for a title?
Yeah, I came in late to the press conference. I was writing something downstairs, and I was told that Anderson said he didn't want to go 5 rounds. He didn't want to have a 5-rounder. Is that correct? If that's the case, then I understand that reasoning. But yeah, if it's at 205, I mean, why not? But at the same token, everyone, like Anderson said, everyone will realize that he's the man at 205 if he wins against Daniel Cormier. But yeah, it'd be nice that if the underdog manages to get it done, that he could actually have another gold belt wrapped around his waist.
Well, my prediction for this one is obviously DC winning because he's got the wrestling. You know, he's been training hard. He's in a great part of his career, and I think he'll take Anderson Silva down. It'll be similar to the Chael Sonnen fight. I don't think you'll buy into this stuff, much like Michael Bisping. But what about you, Cass? What do you believe this fight's going to look like? Obviously, Anderson Silva is a different opponent. It's very difficult to prepare on him pretty much on a day's notice, I suppose. You're not going to be able to really look through the tapes and really prepare for the combinations and all the different things he's going to be throwing. Couldn't there be an upset? Can Anderson Silva win at UFC 200?
Sure, he could. I don't think he will. And I say that knowingly that obviously Michael Bisping, in theory, he shouldn't have beat Rockhold. You know, on paper, nothing was going his way. So of course, Anderson Silva could, beat Daniel Cormier and become the, in some ways, light heavyweight champion, which would be a crazy way to go out at UFC 200. I don't know if it'd be UFC 200 or WrestleMania. You can't write this stuff. But I'm like you. You say Daniel Cormier has only had a few days in theory to prepare for Anderson Silva, but he's had a lifetime of training as far as wrestling. And that still is his best skill set. He's got good striking. I don't think he'll necessarily need it other than to perhaps set things up against Anderson Silva. Chael Sonnen obviously exposed that game plan and probably did it better than anybody against Anderson Silva. Or you could talk about Chris Weidman as well. I think that's how the fight's going to look like. I think that my prediction, Daniel Cormier takes Anderson Silva down. I believe he out-wrestles him. I believe he uses some ground and pound. And I actually think at some point Anderson might even give up his back due to that ground and pound. Potentially a submission from Daniel Cormier in the second round.
Wow, imagine that. And you mentioned WrestleMania. So I've got to talk to the man who we believe should have fought CM Punk and say, who is this Mickey Gall guy and why is he taking a fight, Elias? We try to make it happen on the show. So we've got to ask you, obviously a different perspective. You're a fighter yourself. You know the game very, very well. How much of a chance does Anderson Silva have at UFC 200 to beat DC?
More than any other type of fighter that would take a fight on this notice. Still not much. He's so phenomenal that he would stay tricky and hard to get a beat on probably in his 60s, right? Like he's always going to be a little tough to get the timing and the rhythm down. He's always going to be long. He's going to be, although he's slowed, he's still going to be pretty quick, especially to a light heavyweight. So he's going to have to time something. He's durable as hell, right? So we know that. So he could, if Daniel can't take him down and finish him within a round, then Anderson's going to have another few seconds or nanosecond to get another strike in. I agree that it's not a great shot. The size and the style matchup, Daniel being larger, I think, at least in terms of frame, not in terms of height, and having that wrestling advantage and being really good at riding on the ground as well, I think that's too much to give Anderson a really great shot. But I tell you, he has a better shot than a lot of the other people that were being rumored, especially middleweights, at least because he's taller than most of them and he's better than most of them as well. So I'm picking Daniel, but you can't ever count out someone with the speed and the power and the accuracy and the resilience of Anderson Silva.
Well,
and I was just going to add to that, if we're going to be talking about X factors, I do think that we may potentially be seeing the scariest version of Daniel Cormier. I mean, you got to remember, he wasn't just training for any other opponent. This was Jon Jones. This was the fight that in some ways could make his legacy. He was going to be fighting a guy who was going to be trying to take everything away from him. I think with that level of preparation, Daniel Cormier can take on anyone.
Well, for what it counts, my prediction is that DC will get a TKO in the second round, or if Anderson Silva wins, it'll be a first-round KO. Let's talk about the last piece of news that we sort of found out today. Miesha Tate will be fighting Amanda Nunes in the main event of UFC 200. Now, this is an interesting talking point here. I want to sort of give my thoughts first. Although I respect, obviously, Miesha for what she's done and she's the champion, I believe Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt should be the main event. And I'll explain my theory, and we'll go around and we'll sort of talk about it a little bit. I believe that Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt is the biggest fight of the night. And my theory is that after you have that fight earlier in the card, everybody's going to get so excited, the emotions are going to go so high, that after that fight, people are going to care a little bit less about the Miesha Tate fight. There'll be people turning off the channel. People are going to not be maybe sticking around as long. And having them a little bit earlier in the card guarantees more viewers, guarantees that people won't sort of be over it, will be paying more attention, and will be more excited. So from that perspective of, I guess, an emotional journey for the fans, I think that Lesnar and Hunt should be the main event. But, Elias, I've heard through the rafters, I've been talking on the streets. You're happy with this. This is something that you think is a good move for the UFC.
I do. You make some really interesting points, especially about weaving a narrative. And I think that theory, not that I'm an expert in this, but I think that theory you have about people sticking around and tuning in, it might be more applicable to television as opposed to something folks already plunked down a big chunk and change for. But maybe they turn it off even if they paid $70. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, the reason I like it is because right now that's the only real championship on the line. And I just like the idea of putting competition first, putting the people that have reached the top of it, not necessarily in terms of popularity yet, but in terms of accomplishments, at the top symbolically. I like what that does for a sport that is very often, including by the UFC itself now increasingly, putting spectacle over other stuff. I feel like putting Brock on a card that is headlined by women just seems perfect to me. I mean, you get people that want to see Brock, and maybe they'll stick around and see some really badass chicks fight for the first time, and they'll realize that that they're more skilled than Brock Lesnar. Who knows, you know? But I like your theory. I still like it because I want the champions being at the helm. I didn't like when the UFC deviated from that. To me, it just, for whatever reason, and I can't really enumerate, I think it's the type of respect we need to have for current champions.
UFC 100, Brock Lesnar headlines. Now UFC 200, he's on the card, but Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes are the main event. Is this a sign of how far things have come, Cass? And you're a fan of these gals being up the top?
Look, I think it's phenomenal, especially for Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes. If you thought about this a few years ago, I think even 5 years ago, there was no women's division in the UFC, and now they're headlining the big milestone card. It's not that crazy to think about women headlining UFC 200 because it wasn't that long ago that we thought Ronda Rousey would be headlining. We just didn't know the opponent. So in a way, things have stayed the same. It's just not the fighter that we expected. It's Miesha Tate instead of Ronda Rousey. People are talking about they need to make this the main event because what if Ronda Rousey comes back at the end and, you know, makes a challenge in the cage? Why can't you do that as a co-main event? Are people not going to be as excited? I think they would be. And then you finish out on Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt, whoever wins. And it's interesting because Elias, you obviously said, you know, the symbol, you know, it being symbolic to have the real competition at the end. I mean, if Mark Hunt does beat Brock Lesnar, which there is a very good chance, you've still got a legitimate contender in the heavyweight division. So I don't think it takes away that. Then there's, you know, what we talked about on the show, WrestleMania X8. You had The Rock and Hulk Hogan, two icons of pro wrestling. They were not the main event on WrestleMania, and the main event was for the title because of tradition, and a while afterwards they admitted that that was a mistake. So I would personally prefer to see Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt just from interest perspective. If you look at internet traffic, ratings, views on videos, the questions at press conferences were all, it's been the Brock Lesnar show this whole time, so I think they should be the main event.
Well, the Undertaker fight is always in the middle of WrestleMania, and Brock Lesnar knows that all too well, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Guys, jump on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/submissionradio.au. Subscribe. We have a ton of content on there, and tomorrow we've got the weigh-ins for UFC 200 and the tough finale. You don't want to miss it. Elias, excited to see what's going to happen for the rest of the week. And we'll stay tuned, guys. A lot more to come.